very much, Nathan. There was quite a tour de force from list of rulers as imagination of the historical present to stories of lions as myth of origins to biographical dictionaries as lieu de mémoire to biographical dictionaries as expression of class consciousness. So good luck in drawing this together into questions. We got half an hour or so. Please, the floor is open. There's one in the end. Okay, so I have to write down. Yeah, Thorsten?
I have a question for Nathan.
Well, you have to speak up, or we need this one.
I have a question for Nathan, and since you quote Chamberlain and you use the term ulama all the time, I wonder how you relate ulama to Ayan, and whether is that is one part of the other, or do you just exchange the terms, and where would you put those?
So to me, Chamberlain seems to use those terms interchangeably. I would not use them interchangeably. I'm less interested in the kind of elite strata of society as a totality. He's talking about all of the households, right, of Damascus, which includes both ulama and other kinds of military elites. I'm strictly interested in this project in the people who would have told stories that made their ways into the biographical dictionaries and stories that are about scholars and the production of scholarship. So I'm only talking about people who produce ilm, ulama, right? And when I say ilm, I'm talking about this kind of commoditized ilm that newly emerges in the post-Seljuk era.
Nasser?
Thank you. I want to link with Nathan and Mohamad El-Merheb about class consciousness. Obviously, is a later concept, but were the ulamas aware of their own strengths? Number one, as a class, perhaps yes. But Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, till now, his reputation as being a tough, stubborn person that he did legitimize the Sultan in one stage. He wants to enslave him and free him or whatever. So the question to you about it, how did it resonate with the ulama as a class, and where the Sultan be able to split them? I mean, the mazhabs are the obvious one. There will be other ones. It seemed they couldn't. Why they couldn't, get rid of him, 3 or 4 sultans? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very tough question. Mohamad, you want to try that first? No.
I think the anecdote about selling the Umara, including Baybars, I think the story starts as the ulama or Ibn Abd Salam selling the Umara, that means the Mamalik, in the Suq the slave market. Then it developed into selling, developed into several stages, and then it ended up with Ibn Abd Salam selling Baybars himself. I think most likely it didn't happen. Just a way to show who has the prerogative to legitimate the rule of the Mamluks. And there's nothing more assertive in legitimation than selling the Sultan or telling him, you're a slave, you cannot be a Sultan until I sell you on behalf of Bayt al-Mal. I don't know how it links to Marx, but...
Yeah, well, so I would say that that some, not all, but some of the sultans and the viziers, they became very adept at exploiting the class anxieties inherent in this new system. By that I mean that they used the system of the patronage of doling out these manasib as ways of trying to split the class solidarity, or what I see as class solidarity. Some of them were really good at it, particularly in the early Mamluk period. So I did extensive prosopographical work on the Sayyid So'adat Khanqa, and the history of the Sheikh Shuyukh there, the chief Sufi, is this history of just constant interference from the state in trying to break up the solidarity of this group of scholars whom the state desperately needed to legitimize their rule. It was not successful, but they were really good at trying.
Thank you. Thanks very much, for everybody. So the anecdote about when they're backbiting and then he goes and he pees on them, that's because in Arabic, if you say biaklu fil lahmi, it means they're talking badly about me. So he says, if you're eating my meat, you might as well drink. But my question there related to that is, how does the class analysis explain the presence of these anecdotes about these guys. I mean, I don't know how they call him, I mean, whether he's a Majin or a Majdub or whatever, but why are they there? I mean, I know they're entertaining, but what does a class analysis tell me about why they're there?
Yeah, okay, so I should have said that, or I just didn't have time. So I have written most of this book, except for this theoretical part. So I have a really long chapter on Al-Madin, and I can tie, I think pretty convincingly, each of these anecdotes to concrete historical circumstances that are happening at the time. And each of these anecdotes express a very clear and acute anxiety about the kind of knowledge that is being produced at madrasas. The reason that he's always peeing on scholars, the reason that he's always wandering around at the crossroads is he's this trickster figure who the ulama tell stories about him to give expression to, right? We have this expression in Arabic, tanfis. It's like this kind of blowing off steam of the anxieties inherent in getting paid to produce scholarship for this, these sultans. So it's true that they're very entertaining stories, and one could make the argument that they're just there because they're entertaining. But that doesn't explain why they're so ubiquitous in so many dictionaries, and so many of these kinds of anecdotes make their way in increasing numbers. And I think it's very explicitly tied to their anxieties about the fact that they really shouldn't be taking money to produce this kind of knowledge, or at least that's their tradition, and now they are.
Okay, are we here? So Nate, I don't think. First of all, I don't think that it's. I don't think that this talk is that crazy as you're making it seem. I mean, last year's talk is a different story, but this year's talk. This year's talk. No. I had my hopes set very high. No, the idea of the corporatist identity of the ulama, the idea of self-consciousness as a class, the idea of boundary formation by distinguishing yourself from other social groups, and the idea of a kind of chauvinism towards those other groups, I mean, that's all, I think, relatively unproblematic when we think about the civilian elite in general, right? Not just the ulama within them. The thing that I take kind of exception to is this notion that the ulama, that the military class needs the ulama to legitimize them, and that's an idea that I think we need to get beyond, in the sense that we forget that so many of the ulama, so many of the people who are in these biographical dictionaries are scholars, but they are also administrators. They are working in the state, and they're not there purely to legitimize the state and to kind of give them a veneer of religious authenticity. They're running the state. I mean, they are bureaucrats, and so they are totally embedded with. Maybe you can say that they also perform the work of some kind of religious authentication, but it doesn't make any sense, in my view, to separate them from imperial rule.
Right. When I say that they're legitimizing the state, I don't mean this kind of older idea that the Mamluks are illegitimate, bad Muslims who need religious scholars to make them acceptable. When I say legitimize the state, I mean that the ulama are the state. They are the people who actually perform the state functions. They are in the bureaucracy, they're the administrators, they're the people, the judges, they're running them, right? They're doing all of this work. So that's what I mean by legitimizing. I need a better word than that, yeah. I agree with you.
Thank you.
Sorry, just before, and might I remind the audience also there were other papers in this panel, so we not only focus on class consciousness. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm going to focus on class consciousness. Can I call you Nathan? Nathan, I feel like it's one thing, the caveat you had at the end, that this class is purely a heuristic kind of device that you're using. I don't think it actually comes across as that in your paper. I think it's a very central analytic. And you still haven't sort of answered to the claim, to the argument of how do you defend yourself against the claim of anachronism. This is a very serious thing. And secondly, are you willing to allow for other analytics or other forms of interpretation that are perhaps rooted in thinking about these tropes of alam ad-din in terms of ethics, right? Or in terms of certain kind of moral ideologies or other forms of readings than an anachronistic notion of class, and not to denigrate the importance of social and economic formations, of course.
Right. So when I say that I use class heuristically, but in my paper I use it almost like really intensely, concretely, what I mean is they're not talking about class. None of them are talking about class consciousness. They don't have this vocabulary. We can't speak about class until we get to the capitalist mode of production. I'm using all of this Marxist stuff that is personally valuable to me as a teacher at the University of Missouri to interpret this material in a way that I think is politically progressive. I have no problem with people saying that that's irresponsible, or that I'm out of my mind, or that you can't, just use whatever you want. You just can't mash a whole bunch of stuff together. Like Yo and I were corresponding about the abstract for this, and he's like, in the original one, he's like, you're putting Foucault and Marx, and I can't remember who else I had. You're putting them all together, and you can't make those all fit. And my answer is, it's true, you can't make them fit, but I don't care. Like, these are all people to think with, and my job, I feel like as a scholar, is to find useful ideas to think with, and to impart those ideas either through writing or through pedagogy to move us in a better direction. And right now, my primary concern in the world, besides destroying capitalism, is to get my students to get out of the mode of thinking that the only purpose of an education is to get a job. And so a lot of my work right now is designed around this notion of commoditized knowledge and the detrimental and wicked effects it has on society. Sorry for my sermon.
Okay, we got 2 more questions right now on the list. We still got ample time to discuss, but I will only take names from now on if they are not directed at me. It really won't work. Okay, so the other 2 questions are obviously free.
Okay, luckily for me, my question's for Mohamad. Thank you very much for your paper. I really appreciated how you highlighted the political dimension of the Tabaqat work. So my question is, or a series of questions is, so Ibn Abd al-Salam's biography is obviously very colorful. How representative is it of the biographies in Subki's Tabaqat? And in particular, the themes that you identify, to what extent, I mean, what is, in your understanding, his imagination of the golden age of Shafi'ism? So does he try to kind of impose, or does he read these themes into pre-Seljuk era Shafi'ism, or does it start with that period? And then a separate but related question is, what's the relationship between Ibn Jama'a and Ibn Abd al-Salam? Does he draw on him in any capacity, or was that just sort of a representative biography from Subki and the relationships between Subki and Ibn Jama'a?
Thank you. Regarding the biography, I didn't take any form of historicity. Yeah. I mean, historicity and the biography of Ibn Abd al-Salam and Tabaqat Shafi'iyya al-Kubra was not a concern for me.
I think you have to speak out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Historicity and Tabaqat Shafi'iyya al-Kubra and the biography of Ibn Abd al-Salam was not really on my list, because I know As-Subki had a motive in writing this huge biography, which is only shorter than the biography of Al-Ghazali in Tabaqat Shafi'iyya al-Kubra. And even Al-Ghazali's biography was a listing of all his works. So really it's massive. Historicity maybe, or really what happened in the life of Ibn Abd al-Salam can be taken maybe more from Ibn Wasil. For example, Ibn Wasil discusses the account of the meeting with Qutuz, and he was present personally at the meeting, and he had previously criticized Ibn Abd al-Salam in Damascus for taking a side against the Sultan, Al-Malik al-Ashraf. When it came to Qutuz, he was with Ibn Abd al-Salam. So I tend to think that Ibn Wasil is a better source to really get some more reasonable accounts of the life of Ibn Abd al-Salam. But in the biography, I only use it in Tabaqat Shafi'iyya al-Kubra to see, as you mentioned perfectly, his vision of the golden age of the Shafi'is, pre-Seljuk or Seljuk, Nizam al-Mulk is a great hero of Subki, Salah ad-Din. So yeah, it's very useful to understand how the Shafi'is, maybe the Shafi'i Ash'aris, of course, imagined their golden age, and how they were lamenting the change of time with the rise of the Hanafis under the Mamluks. I hope this answered your first question. The second one on the relation between Ibn Jama'ah and As-Subki, was it? Ibn Abd Salam, yeah. Ibn Abd Salam, the relation, I mean, the idea, if you read about Ibn Jama'ah today, is that it's a repetition of Al-Mawardi, it's a vulgar repetition of Al-Mawardi, it's the usurpation of power and the theory of the caliphate. And I think there was more to Ibn Jama'ah than this. And to understand what perhaps Ibn Jama'ah really meant by many of the themes he discussed in his treatise, we need to see how the Shafi'is themselves thought of political ideas during their times. And perhaps this is stored in Ibn Abd Salam's life as a really big champion of Shafi'i thought. And to understand perhaps Ibn Jama'ah, we need to understand really what's going on in the biography of Ibn Abd Salam. And this is really one link. The other link is that they all come from the same milieu, the milieu of Pouzet's Damascus, and then which shifted to Cairo. So they are all educated the same way, they are all one another's teacher, and so they come from the same milieu. So there are two links to the relation between Ibn Jama'ah and Al-Aziz.
Well, I think people can hear me all right without this. Okay, my question too is directed to Mohamad. So this issue, it can come across very much as advocacy for the Shafi'i madhab, and I'm thinking about the issue of pushback. And I was reminded of Sherman Jackson's work on a prominent Maliki, where this is quite an assault. What is the Hanafi and Maliki response to this? In a sense, they're being delegitimized by what these claims are, yet all four are illicit for litigation and everything, and certainly the Hanafis and Malikis are hearing cases. So what about this matter of pushback from other, the Hanbalis are always going to be off in their own area, and they don't get much litigation, but the others do.
Absolutely. That's at the center of my thesis, actually. Thank you for this question. They do fight back and push back, absolutely. And Sherman Jackson has made the case very clearly for Al-Qarafi and how Al-Qarafi was not happy with the Shafi'i dominance. But Al-Qarafi fought back in his own domain of as a jurist. The Hanafis, however, were braver. And you have the treatise of At-Tarsusi, تحفة الترك فيما يجب أن يفعل في الملك. Sorry if I forgot the title. And he says clearly, Shafi'i thought is not good for the Turks. Please use the Hanafis. And it's another political treatise. It's Hanafi political thought. They don't differ on fiqh that much. Some differences in taxation, how the distribution of spoils of war, but the only difference is that the Hanafis were not happy with the Shafi'i dominance, and they proposed their own vision as, sorry to use the term, but just to make it simpler, as a constitution for the state, which replaces the existing Shafi'i one. So yeah, absolutely, there's this. Thank you for the question.
Oh, I have actually three questions, very short ones. For the first paper, the list of kings. I teach in a small university, so when I teach in the Middle East, it means 5,000 years. So I teach ancient history. And the first form, in my opinion, of history is lists of kings. Is essential to understanding civilization. It organizes the past. And I was surprised when you mentioned them that you said that they got them wrong. And usually they are rarely wrong. That's one question. And second question in order, actually. The origin of the Mongols. I'm a historian of early Islam, so I encounter lots of Arabs, and now I'm kind of interested in the Mamluks, and I encounter a lot of Kurds and Turkoman, and I see them thoroughly sort of Islamized and Syrianized, and I was surprised to find actually the Turkish lore. I rarely encountered it, so I was wondering, why didn't we encounter it before? And the third question, the Tabaqat Shafi'iyya al-Kubra. I study Ibn Sa'd, and I always wondered why people started with tabaqat, which is generational, and then they moved to alphabetical organization. And now you alerted me that generational organization is probably purely political, very political. I wonder if you have something to say about that. Thank you.
Thanks for the well. List of kings are as old as human history. That's not working. Okay.
Does it work, the microphone?
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, list of kings are as old as human history. Definitely. The question here is why do these lists all of a sudden start popping up in chronographic texts, in a sense? I don't remember having said they were wrong. So. Some were more. In some cases they were very vague. In others they're very, very explicit. But that's the main difference, I guess. Yeah.
All right. So then I guess it's my turn. So if I understood your question correct, it's why did we not encounter Turkish law in Arabic texts before?
Yes. Is this a special case?
Yes. That. Yeah. Because I was going to say, I'm not really sure if I can answer that. I didn't really talk about that in the paper because it's a very complicated story, but it's rather unclear where he got the story from, where Ibn Dawdari got the story from. So one thing, of course, is that he himself is on both sides of the family of Turkish descent, and he speaks Turkish, and he's kind of flaunting that throughout the story, giving the Turkish original in transcription and then saying, oh, in Arabic it means such and such. So the story of how he found this story, he also relates. So he's in a kind of anachronistically termed a book club with this Amin Din, the secretary to Badruddin al-Baysari. Ibn Daniel, the oculist, is also in there, although he is not actually present, he says, at the time of the reading. That might actually be because he already died, because he dies in 1310, and that's around the time that this book, Ibn Dawdari says, shows up. So, yeah, this Amin ad-Din, he talks about this book, and he brings it, and he carries it on his head, and he kisses it, and in the text, it also gives some names of people who had translated it earlier. So there's a Jibril Bakhtishu, and there's a Suleiman al-Azerbaijani, who are presented as narrators and or translators of the original text, which is said to have come from Turkish to Persian and from Persian to Arabic. I have not myself looked into how that text goes back. Uri Hermann has, and he says that he has not been able to find any other copy of this. Because I personally more focus on Mamluk representation of Mongols and not so much that type of research. But yes, it is unique. I mean, as I said in the introduction, you do see that the origin stories of the Mongols, as it's been received in the Persian text, shows up sometimes, because they've read Jurayni, for example, or Rashid ad-Din. But yeah, this is fairly unique. And I think it hinges on Ibn Dawdari being of Turkish descent and being fairly proud of that, maybe. But at the same time, he really criticizes parts of the contents. Everything he thinks is contrary to Islam. So it's a very interesting narrative, really.
Well, in Al-Tabari, the first volume, where he recounts the story of Adam and the prophets, and he parallels it with the Persian story of origin. But he legitimizes that story, although probably not very Islamic. So I don't know in this case whether he is very proud or not very proud. The Persians were very proud.
I mean, he's not very proud of the story, but I think he is proud of at least his knowledge of the Turkish language. But what's interesting is that he's very critical of the part of the Turkish legend, where he says about the spontaneous generation in a cave from clay of the Turkish ancestor, and there's winds coming in for air, and there is a sun coming in for fire, and so all the elements come together and create. He's very critical of that. Also because there is an aspect of that it's supposedly the natural lifespan is 120 years. He's also very critical of that. He says God creates, not anything else, and God decides death, and there's no such thing as a natural lifespan. That's all in the hands of God. So he's very critical of that bit, but everything else, not so much really. I mean, he's critical of the heathen practices, but he doesn't say it didn't happen. I mean, obviously the Mongols and the Turks both were pagan, so yeah, he's critical of that creation bit, but other than that, he's not that critical.
And the tabaqat, I'm glad you see the political angle in the tabaqat. Of course, some of the functions have changed over time, and the whole tabaqat are not perennial. They are really should be seen in a contextual way. And definitely by the time of As-Subki, Tajuddin Subki, there is a very political angle to it. It's not only bragging about the Shafi'is, the Shafi'i madhab, nor it's about Isnad. There's definitely a political angle. And I don't know about Ibn Sa'd, to be honest, but definitely, yeah, okay, great. I mean, definitely there's a lot of politics in Tabaqat. He even mentioned that, I forgot the sentence, the way he worded it in Arabic, but he said like, ad-duwal tafsud, the whole state collapse or become rotten if it is not under the Shafi'i madhab. So it's very political, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I think perhaps you can cover that on later on. Any more questions? Otherwise, I would one for you. With your lists, I mean, it's quite striking that obviously it's nothing new. If you look at the Ayyubid period, etc., they are there, but they never go into that depth. So they normally stop at second-level regional guys. They obviously imaginations of the present because they completely disregard the very complex situation on the ground and that it's not that neat and easy. But it's quite striking that in the Mamluk period this much deeper listing, going down to secretaries, etc. And I wonder basically what your thoughts about that is, basically what is the social function of going deeper, because these guys were there during the earlier period, they're just not mentioned, so why are they suddenly mentioned? And then the second point, perhaps it's self-evident, I just wanted to ask you again on that these more global lists, as you called them, and I think that's quite a new phenomenon, at least that you have them so consistently in the 15th century. So do you see that basically as, because the world is getting more global, so to say, the horizons are getting wider, that people are becoming aware of it, that they feel the need to situate themselves within the wider political landscape, or what is your take on this globalization of rulers lists?
I think there are pretty big questions for 2 minutes left, and I don't have any immediate good answers to either of them. I think it's interesting to see how this changes, and the interesting thing is to try and think further on why or how, what does that mean, what does that tell us. Perhaps it just tells us something also about changes that were going on, at least in the perception of these positions and their importance, and in terms from a state formation perspective, how there is an apparatus of the state that is appearing in increasingly powerful ways, and that is being constructed in various ways as very powerful, and including in these kind of texts, and with the people who are manning these apparatus being more than just agents of the ruler at the top, but having been powerful people in their own right in various ways. So that may be one way to explain it. It's very interesting, as in a text by Ibn Kathir, for instance, he doesn't do this kind of listing until the 650s. But then in a very erratic way, and only from 700 he picks up this habit of doing it every year. So it's something that becomes increasingly important even within these types of texts. And there are other texts, even contemporary texts with Al-Makrizi, Al-Aini, who do not use this kind of listing, like Ibn Hajar's in Ba'al-Umr. He doesn't use it. Ibn Iyaz doesn't have this habit, doesn't pick it up, but then others do, like a Sahawi in the Tibr al-Mazbuk, he does pick it up. So there's a lot of variety there, and it's very interesting this is a first sort of engaging with the subject, but there's much more, I'm sure, that can be said about it. The global lists, well, it's an interesting one. Why in the 15th century does it open up in these particular ways? yeah, well, there must be something that changes in terms of the wider perspective that people take, and there's a lot of things that come to mind there from the whole new world that emerges with Timur in the early 15th century to the whole the commercial networks that becomes so much more intensive, to also all kinds of other networks of travelers and other people moving around that become so much more intensive, so that perhaps there's much more information coming in until Ibn Tahribirdi, who in the list of 861 explains in quite some detail what the resources and the political economy is of the island of Ceylon in this list. He goes into, looks at Ceylon or Calicut and says this is a land where we get our pepper from, and then he explains who the people there are, etc. So the world, in the way that it can be imagined in much more than just fantastic ways, seems to be opening up, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much to all the speakers.